Inside El Salvador's mega prison, how a nation locked away its most feared gangs. The doors didn't just close on inmates in El Salvador. They closed on an entire era of fear. For decades, gangs controlled neighborhoods, dictated daily life, and ruled entire communities through violence and intimidation. Streets became borders. Silence became survival, and the state appeared powerless to stop it. Then everything changed. Almost overnight, thousands of suspected gang members were rounded up and sent to a single place, a massive prison designed not for rehabilitation, not for negotiation, but for absolute containment. This was not a traditional correctional facility. It was a message. Inside El Salvador's mega prison, identity disappears immediately. Hair is shaved. Personal history is erased. Movement is synchronized. Silence is enforced. Inmates are packed together under constant surveillance, stripped of status, symbols, and hierarchy. This is incarceration at scale. Fast, overwhelming, and unapologetically harsh. Supporters call it necessary. Critics call it extreme. But no one denies its impact. Crime rates collapsed. Gangs vanished from the streets. And behind the walls, a new kind of prison reality took shape. One where survival depends not on power, but on submission. In this documentary, we go inside El Salvador's mega prison system to examine how it works, why it was built, and what life looks like for the thousands locked inside. From mass arrests to daily routines, from total control to global controversy, this is a story of a prison designed to end gang rule, whatever the cost. Because when a nation decides fear is no longer acceptable, the response can be just as terrifying. From streets to cells, how El Salvador built a prison to break gang power. For years, El Salvador lived under an unspoken reality. The state did not fully control its own territory. Entire neighborhoods were dominated by gangs. Streets had invisible borders. Residents learned which colors to wear, which routes to avoid, and when silence was safer than speaking. Extortion was routine. Violence was not random. It was systematic, enforced to maintain fear and obedience. For many Salvadorans, daily life meant navigating a country where gangs functioned as a parallel authority. This did not happen overnight. Decades of civil conflict, weak institutions, poverty, and deportation policies created the conditions for gangs to flourish. Groups that began as loose networks hardened into structured organizations with leadership, discipline, and enforcement. Over time, they embedded themselves deeply into communities, using intimidation and loyalty to replace state presence. By the time the government decided to act decisively, the scale of the problem was massive. Traditional incarceration had failed to contain gang influence. Arrested members continued to communicate from inside prisons. Some facilities effectively became gang headquarters, where orders were issued, conflict settled, and extortion coordinated. The prison system itself was compromised by overcrowding and corruption, allowing gang structures to survive confinement. The response that followed was unprecedented. In a sweeping shift of policy, the Salvadoran government launched a mass crackdown on gang activity. Emergency measures expanded arrest powers. Tens of thousands of suspected gang members were detained in a matter of months. Courts processed cases at extraordinary speed. Due process was compressed in favor of immediate containment. But the question remained, where do you put that many inmates, and how do you stop them from reorganizing once inside? The answer was scale. The government moved to construct a prison unlike any the country had ever seen, a facility designed not for rehabilitation or gradual reform, but for total incapacitation. This was the birth of CECOT, a mega prison built with one purpose: to permanently disrupt gang power by removing its human infrastructure. CECOT was conceived as a system, not just a building. Its size alone was intended to overwhelm traditional prison dynamics. Housing tens of thousands of inmates in a single, tightly controlled complex eliminated the fragmentation that allowed gangs to dominate individual facilities. Instead of multiple prisons with competing hierarchies, there would be one centralized space governed by uniform rules and relentless oversight. Control was engineered into every detail. From the layout of cell blocks to the flow of movement, the prison was designed to minimize interaction, communication, and organization. Large, open dormitory-style housing replaced smaller cells, allowing surveillance to operate at scale. Cameras covered nearly every angle. Guards operated in coordinated units, not as isolated officers vulnerable to intimidation. The goal was not to punish individuals one by one. It was to neutralize gangs as a collective force. Upon arrival, inmates experienced immediate de-identification. Hair was shaved. Clothing was standardized. Tattoos, once symbols of power and allegiance, were rendered meaningless inside an environment where everyone looked the same and status held no value. This visual erasure was not symbolic. It was strategic. Gang culture depends on recognition. Names, marking gestures, and reputations are tools of authority. CECOT stripped those tools away. Inmates were reduced to bodies in space, managed by numbers, movement schedules, and physical containment. The prison did not negotiate with gang hierarchy. It ignored it entirely. Mass arrests fueled the system rapidly. Buses arrived continuously, unloading groups of detainees processed in assembly line fashion. Speed was essential. The longer individuals remained in transit or temporary holding, the greater the risk of organization and communication. By moving quickly, the state aimed to shock the system before gangs could adapt. Inside the prison, silence replaced influence. Communication between inmates was heavily restricted. There were no recreational yards designed for social interaction, no educational programs intended to build community, no opportunities to assert dominance through charisma or intimidation. Movement was synchronized. Meals were controlled. Sleep schedules were enforced. This was containment, not correction. Supporters of the approach argued that extreme measures were justified by extreme circumstances. For communities long terrorized by gangs, the visible removal of gang members brought immediate relief. Homicide rates dropped sharply. Extortion declined. Streets once considered no-go zones reopened to normal life. Critics raised serious concerns. Human rights organizations questioned mass detention practices, the suspension of procedural safeguards, and conditions inside the prison. They warned that sweeping arrests risked detaining innocent individuals, and that prolonged confinement without clear legal resolution could create long-term instability. Both perspectives coexist, and both are central to understanding CECOT. This prison was never intended to be neutral. It was designed as an instrument of state power, deployed rapidly and decisively to reclaim control. Its existence reflects a political calculation that restoring public safety required sacrificing traditional correctional norms. What makes this moment historically significant is not just the prison itself, but what it represents. CECOT marks a shift away from individualized justice toward collective incapacitation. Instead of asking how to rehabilitate offenders, the system asks how to remove a threat as efficiently as possible. It treats gangs not as collections of people, but as a phenomenon to be dismantled. For inmates sent here, the transition is absolute. There is no gradual adjustment, no orientation designed to explain rights or privileges. Life inside CECOT begins at maximum intensity and remains there. Identity is flattened. Time loses shape. The outside world becomes distant almost immediately. This is how El Salvador chose to confront its most feared problem, by building a prison so large, so controlled, and so uncompromising that gang power would have nowhere to operate. Whether this approach represents a lasting solution or a temporary suppression remains debated, but its impact, immediate, dramatic, and controversial, cannot be denied. A nation pushed to its limit, a prison built as a weapon, and a system designed not to manage gangs, but to end them. Life at scale. What daily existence looks like inside the mega-prison. Inside El Salvador's mega-prison, daily life is defined by scale and sameness. This is not a facility designed around individual cells, personal routines, or gradual movement through a sentence. It is designed to manage thousands of bodies at once, moving, feeding, housing, and controlling them as a single mass. From the first morning inside, inmates learn that individuality has no place here. Only compliance does. The day begins without ceremony. There are no alarms tailored to personal schedules, no staggered movement times. Lights come on. Orders are issued. Entire cell blocks rise together. The architecture itself discourages deviation. Large dormitory-style housing replaces traditional cells, allowing guards to observe dozens, sometimes hundreds, of inmates simultaneously. Privacy does not exist. Beds are arranged in tight rows. Personal space is limited to the outline of your body. There are no personal belongings beyond the bare minimum. Everything an inmate needs to survive is issued, regulated, and identical. The goal is not comfort, but predictability. Movement is synchronized. When inmates leave housing areas, they do so in control groups under heavy guard presence. Hands are positioned in specific ways. Heads are often kept down. Talking is discouraged or outright prohibited. Communication is a risk, and risk is what the system is designed to eliminate. Meals reflect the same philosophy. Food is distributed efficiently in large quantities with minimal interaction. Eating is fast, functional, and silent. There are no communal conversations, no time to linger. Nutrition is calculated to sustain the body, not offer relief or pleasure. Hunger is managed, not comforted. Work and recreation are not central features here. Unlike traditional prisons that use labor or programs to occupy time, this mega-prison minimizes activities that could foster organization or hierarchy. Idle time exists, but it is controlled idle time. Sitting, waiting, existing under observation. Boredom is not seen as a problem. It is seen as a stabilizer. Surveillance is constant and visible. Cameras monitor nearly every space. Guard towers overlook housing areas. Patrols move in coordinated formations, reinforcing the sense of omnipresent authority. This visibility serves a psychological purpose. Inmates are never allowed to forget that the state is watching. Discipline is collective. If a rule is broken, consequences can affect entire groups. Movement restrictions, reduced privileges, or tighter controls are applied broadly. This discourages individual defiance by tying personal behavior to group outcomes. Responsibility becomes shared, whether willingly or not. This collective pressure suppresses resistance. In environments where gangs once thrived on hierarchy and influence, this structure removes leverage. There is no audience for intimidation, no opportunity to demonstrate power, no space to organize quietly. Attempts to assert dominance dissolve into the mass. Time behaves differently here. Days blend together. Without variation in routine or milestones to anticipate, memory flattens. Inmates mark time by meals and counts, not by progress or achievement. The future feels distant and undefined. For many, this creates psychological numbness. When nothing changes, emotion dulls. Anger fades into exhaustion. Fear loses its edge. Hope becomes abstract. This emotional flattening is not accidental. It is a byproduct of an environment engineered to reduce volatility. Healthcare exists, but it is functional. Medical attention focuses on preventing outbreaks and managing acute issues. Chronic conditions are monitored, not deeply treated. The priority is stability across a massive population, not individual well-being. Contact with the outside world is extremely limited. Visits are rare or non-existent. Communication channels are tightly controlled. This isolation accelerates detachment from life beyond the walls. Families fade into memory. News arrives filtered, if at all. The prison becomes the only reality that feels immediate. What makes this daily existence unique is not cruelty in the traditional sense. There are no constant beatings, no daily riots. Instead, there is compression of space, of time, of identity. The prison does not seek to terrify inmates individually. It seeks to neutralize them collectively. Supporters argue that this approach works. Crime outside the walls dropped sharply. Gang presence in communities weakened. The visible absence of gang leaders sent a powerful message. For many citizens, the results felt immediate and undeniable. Critics argue that this environment carries long-term risks. They warn that suppressing identity and communication at this scale may stabilize the present while creating future instability. A population held indefinitely under extreme control, without pathways for resolution or reintegration, may carry consequences that unfold slowly and unpredictably. Inside the prison, these debates are distant. What matters day to day is simple. Follow orders, blend into the mass, endure the routine. Survival here is not about strength or strategy. It is about disappearing into compliance. Not chaos, not negotiation, but total, organized containment, applied relentlessly every single day. control without negotiation, how the system prevents power from reforming. In traditional prisons, power rarely disappears. It moves. When leaders are isolated, new ones emerge. When communication is restricted, new codes are created. When systems tighten, people adapt. This cycle has defined incarceration for decades, especially in facilities housing organized groups. What makes El Salvador's megaprison different is not just its size, but its refusal to participate in that cycle at all. There is no negotiation here. From the moment inmates enter, the system makes one thing clear. There will be no hierarchy, no informal authority, and no space for leadership to reform. The prison does not attempt to manage gangs. It attempts to erase the conditions that allow gangs to exist. Power in this environment is centralized and absolute. Guards do not interact individually with inmates unless necessary. Orders are issued broadly. Movement happens in synchronized waves. The absence of personal interaction is intentional. Relationships, even adversarial ones, are minimized because relationships create leverage. Leverage creates influence. Influence creates power. The system removes each step before it can take shape. Communication is the first target. In many prisons, gangs survive through language, coded phrases, gestures, timing, reputation. In the mega prison, communication is restricted to the point of irrelevance. Talking is limited. Eye contact is discouraged. Group interaction is tightly controlled. Without consistent communication, coordination becomes nearly impossible. Even silence is monitored. Inmates are not left alone to whisper or exchange signals. Housing arrangements are designed for visibility rather than privacy. Guards are positioned to observe entire groups at once. Cameras fill the gaps. The environment itself refuses secrecy. This constant exposure neutralizes organization. Where gangs rely on secrecy and trust, the mega prison offers neither. There is no safe space to plan, no private moment to build loyalty, no opportunity to test boundaries gradually. Attempts to organize dissolve under the weight of visibility. Time reinforces this control. Days are identical. Routines never change. Without variation, there is no opportunity to exploit patterns. In traditional prisons, inmates learn schedules, identify weak points, and operate between them. Here, predictability is weaponized, not as a vulnerability, but as a cage. Everything happens when the system decides it should. This removes initiative entirely. Initiative is dangerous in an environment built to suppress leadership. Any attempt to act independently draws attention. Attention brings intervention. Over time, inmates learn that the safest path is complete passivity. Passivity becomes survival. The system does not need to punish frequently because it has already removed incentive. There is nothing to gain from resistance, no status to earn, no influence to accumulate, no audience to impress. Without reward, defiance loses purpose. This creates a profound psychological shift. Inmates accustomed to environments where dominance mattered must recalibrate. The skills that once ensured survival, intimidation, charisma, aggression, are useless here. They cannot be expressed, recognized, or rewarded. Over time, these traits atrophy. This is not rehabilitation in the traditional sense. There are no counseling sessions aimed at reflection, no programs designed to rebuild identity. Instead, the system relies on neutralization, reducing individuals to a state where harmful behavior cannot manifest because the conditions for it do not exist. Critics argue this approach suppresses symptoms rather than addressing causes. They point out that removing power does not remove ideology, that compliance does not equal transformation, that silence does not mean acceptance. These concerns are not unfounded, but they also misunderstand the immediate objective of the mega prison. The goal is not reform. The goal is interruption. By halting communication, disrupting hierarchy, and preventing organization, the system buys time. Time for communities to recover. Time for gang structures outside the prison to collapse. Time for fear to recede. Inside the prison, this interruption feels permanent. Without milestones, without progression, inmates experience time as suspension. Life does not advance. It simply continues. The absence of movement, social, emotional, or strategic, becomes a defining feature of existence. This has consequences. Mental stagnation sets in. Motivation fades. Thought loops repeat. Without goals or threats, the mind drifts. Some inmates retreat inward, replaying memories. Others focus narrowly on routine to maintain a sense of control. The system interprets this as stability. There are few incidents. Little visible unrest. Order is maintained. From an operational perspective, the prison functions as designed. The absence of power struggles is taken as proof of effectiveness, but stability achieved through suppression raises questions. How long can a population remain passive without consequence? What happens when suppression becomes normal? Does prolonged neutralization create calm, or merely delay conflict? These questions linger beyond the walls. For now, inside the megaprison, the reality is unambiguous. Power does not circulate. Authority does not fragment. Leadership does not emerge. The system does not bend. In this environment, survival is no longer about navigating social dynamics or asserting dominance. It is about disappearing into compliance. This reveals the core mechanism that separates this prison from others around the world. Not brutality, not fear, but the deliberate removal of every pathway through which power could reform. A prison that does not react to gangs. A prison that renders gangs irrelevant. And a system that proves control does not always require violence, only the elimination of alternatives. The human cost. What extreme containment does to the mind and body. When control operates at the scale and intensity of El Salvador's megaprison, the most profound effects are not always visible. There are no constant riots, no daily spectacles of violence. Instead, the cost appears slowly, in posture, in behavior, and in the quiet ways the human mind responds to prolonged containment. Extreme control reshapes people from the inside out. Inmates enter with identities formed by the streets, affiliations, reputations, survival instincts honed in violent environments. Inside the megaprison, those identities are rendered useless almost immediately. There is no space to perform them, no recognition to sustain them. Over time, this creates a psychological vacuum. Without roles, people drift. Daily life offers no goals beyond compliance. There is nothing to earn, no status to achieve, no path to improvement. The absence of upward or downward movement flattens motivation. Inmates stop thinking in terms of progress and begin thinking in terms of endurance. This state affects cognition. Attention narrows. Thought becomes repetitive. Without stimulation or meaningful interaction, the mind circles the same memories, regrets, and anxieties. For some, this leads to emotional numbness. For others, it produces heightened internal stress. There's nowhere to go. The body absorbs the stress quietly. Hours of enforced stillness stiffen muscles and joints. Limited movement weakens endurance. Posture becomes rigid, shaped by constant supervision and correction. Over time, even standing and sitting change, reflecting an environment where the body is always being watched. Sleep is regulated, but not restorative. Lights, noise, and awareness of constant proximity to others disrupt deep rest. Dreams are fragmented. Waking up does not bring renewal, it brings continuation. Fatigue accumulates slowly, often unnoticed until it becomes chronic. Nutrition sustains, but does not nourish. Meals are designed for efficiency and consistency, not recovery, combined with stress and inactivity. This contributes to gradual physical decline. Weight fluctuates. Energy drops. Minor ailments linger longer than they would outside. Medical care focuses on population stability. The priority is preventing outbreaks and managing acute issues across thousands of inmates. Individual pain is acknowledged only when it threatens operational control. Chronic discomfort becomes part of the background of daily life. Psychologically, the absence of agency is the heaviest burden. Human beings rely on choice, even small choices, to maintain a sense of self. In the megaprison, choice is almost entirely removed. When to move, when to eat, when to rest, when to speak, all are decided externally. Over time, the ability to make decisions weakens. This loss of agency affects emotional regulation. Inmates may feel detached from their own reactions. Anger flares briefly, then fades into exhaustion. Sadness lingers without expression. Fear loses urgency because there is no action it can motivate. Emotional responses flatten, not because they disappear, but because they have no function. This is often misread as calm. From the outside, inmates appear compliant and subdued. The system interprets this as success. But beneath that surface, many experience a quiet erosion of self. Identity becomes thin. Life feels suspended rather than lived. The scale of the environment amplifies everything. In smaller facilities, individuals can sometimes maintain a sense of uniqueness through relationships or routines. In the mega prison, mass management eliminates these footholds. Being one among thousands reinforces anonymity. Anonymity reinforces passivity. Time stretches. Without milestones, days blend together. Weeks lose distinction. Memory becomes procedural. Inmates remember schedules and rules, but struggle to recall experiences. Life becomes a series of repetitions without narrative. This is the hidden cost of total containment. The system succeeds in preventing organization, violence, and rebellion, but it does so by compressing human experience to its narrowest form. People exist, but they do not develop. They endure, but they do not grow. For supporters of the prison, this is an acceptable trade-off. Public safety improved. Communities stabilized. Fear receded. From that perspective, the human cost inside the walls is justified by the reduction of suffering outside them. For critics, the cost is a warning. They argue that prolonged exposure to such conditions risks creating a population defined by numbness and dependency, people who may eventually re-enter society without the skills needed to navigate freedom, responsibility, or connection. Inside the prison, these debates are distant. What remains is the daily reality of extreme containment, a life reduced compliance, repetition, and waiting, a system that achieves order not by engaging the human mind, but by limiting it. Chapter 4 exposes what statistics and security footage cannot show: the quiet, cumulative toll of a prison designed to neutralize people completely, and the question of what remains when neutrality becomes permanent. What comes next? Stability, risk, and the future of extreme incarceration. El Salvador's mega prison was built to solve an immediate crisis, and in the short term, it worked. Crime dropped sharply. Extortion declined. Neighborhoods once controlled by gangs reopened to normal life. For many citizens, the change felt dramatic and undeniable. Streets grew quieter. Businesses stayed open. Fear loosened its grip. But the true test of this system lies not in its immediate results. It lies in what happens next. Extreme incarceration creates stability by removing threats rapidly and decisively. It does not negotiate. It does not rehabilitate in the traditional sense. It incapacitates. This approach buys time. Time for institutions to rebuild. Time for communities to heal. Time for fear to recede. The question is how that time is used. Inside the mega prison, thousands of inmates exist in suspension. There are no clear pathways forward. Sentences are long or undefined. Legal processes move slowly. Rehabilitation programs are minimal by design. The system prioritizes containment over transformation. This creates a long-term dilemma. A population held under extreme control for extended periods will change. Identity flattens. Initiative weakens. Emotional expression dulls. These changes may maintain order inside the prison, but they complicate any future reintegration, whether through release transfer or policy shift. If inmates are eventually released, the transition will be severe. People conditioned for passivity struggle with autonomy. Decision-making feels heavy. Social interaction feels risky. The outside world, unpredictable and unstructured, can feel more dangerous than confinement. Without preparation, release becomes another destabilizing event rather than a resolution. If inmates are never released, other risks emerge. A permanently warehoused population requires indefinite resources, oversight, and legitimacy. Public support may be strong now, but it depends on continued perception of safety and fairness. Any failure, wrongful detention, humanitarian crisis, or international pressure could shift that balance. The system also sends a message beyond its borders. Other nations watch closely. Some see a model for rapid crime reduction, Others see a warning about the erosion of legal safeguards. The mega prison becomes a symbol, either of decisive governance or of excessive state power, depending on perspective. What makes this moment unique is its scale. Rarely has a country attempted to neutralize organized crime so quickly and so completely through incarceration alone. The prison is not just a facility. It is a policy embodied in concrete and steel. That policy carries trade-offs. Safety gained outside the walls is weighed against human costs inside them. Immediate calm is weighed against long-term uncertainty. Control is achieved, but at the expense of flexibility. For the inmates inside, these debates are abstract. What matters is survival within a system that does not promise change. Days are endured, not progressed through. Time passes without markers. Life exists in a holding pattern. For society, the outcome is still unfolding. If institutions strengthen, communities rebuild, and alternatives to gang life emerge, the mega prison may be remembered as a turning point, a harsh but temporary measure that bought time for deeper reform. If those conditions fail to materialize, the prison risks becoming a permanent fixture, a solution that solved one problem while creating another, slower one in its place. This is the reality of extreme incarceration. It can stop violence. It can restore order. But it cannot, on its own, resolve the conditions that created the crisis. This closes a comparison by revealing the final tension at the heart of El Salvador's approach, a system that succeeds at containment, but leaves the future unresolved. The prison holds the present tightly. What it releases, if anything, will define the legacy of this moment, when control becomes the country's last option. El Salvador's mega prison was never meant to be ordinary. It was built as a response to fear that had gone on for too long, fear that shaped daily life, controlled neighborhoods, and silenced entire communities. In that moment, the nation chose certainty over caution, containment over compromise, and control over delay. Inside the walls, the result is absolute order. No hierarchy, no negotiation, no room for power to reform. The system works because it removes choice so completely that resistance becomes irrelevant. Gangs lose their influence. Violence disappears. Stability returns, at least on the surface. But stability has a price. Thousands of lives exist in suspension. Identity flattens. Time loses meaning. Rehabilitation is replaced by neutralization. The prison succeeds at stopping what once was, but it leaves unanswered questions about what comes next. For the streets outside, the silence feels like relief. For the cells inside, the silence feels permanent. El Salvador's mega prison stands as one of the most extreme examples of incarceration in the modern world. Not just because of its size or severity, but because of what it represents. A nation deciding that fear could only be defeated by absolute control. Whether this becomes a temporary turning point or a permanent solution will define its legacy. Because prisons don't just reflect crime. They reflect how far society is willing to go to end it. Thanks for watching. Like, share, and subscribe.